Welcome back to A Writer's Mind. I'm your host, Still Shrey Gladden. And this week I am working on wrapping up some of the revisions that I'd had in mind, which have led to more revisions. It's kind of an ongoing, never-ending process, it would seem. But mainly, I'm just trying to get the main revisions in place so I can get them off my list of things to fix, because it was really starting to just crowd everything together in my head, and I was having a hard time moving forward. And also, I think I just needed to go back and make those changes so things were set so I can get back into a creative mindset of new content and further developing the story. So Monday of this week, I mostly was just working on revisions and then kind of going back and fixing other stuff that the revisions then necessitated changing. A lot of small things, and I think a lot of things that I'll still need to go back and clean up when I get to the point where I'm going to just really work on detailed revisions. Right now, it's just the big stuff to improve the continuity of the story, so I'm not creating more mistakes than need be. So on Tuesday, I did add some new content as well as working on some of the revisions, mainly because I had decided with the character Riss that she's going to be a larger part of the story than I had originally planned. So I needed to go back and change the first conversation with Riss because it wasn't lining up with that. And then when I got to chapter 8, I'd had a scene break there where she had talked to Sarah about helping with the posters and going to meet the family. And then I'd kind of just skipped ahead to the next scene with the pastor and their conversation and that not going well. But I needed another minute there to talk with Riss because she had been really just left out of the story in a way that wasn't making sense with her being Sage's best friend. So at the beginning of chapter 8, Sage, as Beatrix as Sage, I had written that she just texted Riss and was just like, oh, I won't be around for lunch. And then I didn't come back to it. I didn't deal with that. I didn't have Riss react or have an issue with that or anything. I just kind of ignored that there might be consequences to that. So I added in a second part of chapter 8 and moved everything else down one and renumbered the chapters, where Riss confronts Sage / Beatrix after she finishes talking with Sarah. She gets this text and is kind of hurt by it, is a little bit suspicious. So I added in that Riss had tried texting Sage several times the night before to check in on her. And Beatrix was in the middle of, she had the fight with the mom, and then she's trying to look up stuff about Leon. So she just wasn't really in a mindset to deal with Sarah and wasn't really considering or taking seriously the fact that Riss might be involved in all of this. She'd kind of written her off a little bit because she'd had an alibi for the night that Arya disappeared. But in the previous chapters, I went back through revisions and built up the sense that Beatrix is starting to have that something's a little off with this case, that it's more than just Arya having gone missing, that there's a wider problem that's causing the karmic disturbance. So I had kind of built in some of that to put her focus more squarely on that, which caused her to ignore Riss a little bit. But then she's kind of reminded in this new section of chapter 8 that it's a mistake to count anybody out or to think that they're not going to be helpful or useful. So she has a conversation with Riss where Riss expresses her frustration with her that she's not paying attention to her. Things have been weird since Arya disappeared. What's going on? It's clear to the reader that Riss doesn't know what happened to Arya. She wasn't there. She wasn't involved in that part of it. But she also kind of lets some other things slip about, well, the way people are talking about Arya is getting under her skin, like she was a little, Miss Perfect and quiet, no problems kind of girl. But there's also this sense that hopefully I've created that Riss knows that they are not supposed to discuss Arya out in the open. So she's holding back saying anything because she thinks Sage already knows everything. So she doesn't need to, remember how this, or, discuss these personal details and these secrets that they're keeping, because in her mind, she doesn't need to. Sage already knows all the secrets because they've been involved in whatever this is together. So, she just kind of has these little hints and mentions that Sage would absolutely know what she was talking about, but Beatrix has no clue. So she tries to nudge her a little bit to get her to say a little bit more, which she gets, but Riss is still very aware that they're like sitting in the cafeteria, so she's not going to say a whole lot where anybody could overhear them and put them in jeopardy of coming under suspicion. And then, so that kind of builds up somewhere else that I think I'm going to need to add another chapter, and I'm looking for where to put that. I may need to put something in between some of the chapters I've already written, because I think I'm going to need it to come back up before where I stopped before going back to revision. So I'll look at that as I kind of keep working my way forward. But I'm going to have a point where Beatrix is going to find some time to spend with Riss privately to try to get more out of her through conversation without her, becoming suspicious of why she's asking all these questions, which I think is going to be a challenging conversation to write, but hopefully I can get it where I want it to without being awkward or weird or unrealistic. So that may be a chapter that is going to need several passes before I get it right. That's what it is sometimes. Also in this section that I also added some hints to the relationship between Sage and Riss being different than what anyone else is aware of. So Beatrix is surprised when Riss grabs her hand at one point when they're having kind of a more emotional side of the conversation, which at first she's kind of just like, well, that just may be teenage girls. They hold hands, they hug, they're a little bit more expressive than boys typically. So she kind of takes note of it, but doesn't really think too much of it until Riss starts kind of making some more intimate motions, rubbing her hand, kind of things like that, where Beatrix is left wondering, what exactly is the relationship between these two girls? Because she's already seen that Riss is dominated by Sage. Sage is the boss of the relationship. She's kind of controlling and demanding, and Riss bows to that fairly easily, though at times she shows some sparks of maybe pushing back. She's not quite there yet. So this is kind of giving some hints to Beatrix that while Riss may not have been involved in Arya's disappearance, there's a good chance she's involved in everything else because she is devoted to Sage and kind of under Sage's control in a lot of ways. So I think this is one where I need to build up that relationship in order to make it more a part of the story and show how Sage has been causing some of the elements that are producing this karmic disturbance through her manipulation of other people, through creating these harmful influences and situations, either herself or through the use of other people, which is kind of why it's becoming a big enough thing that they had sent an investigator to come look at it. So between Sage and Arya and the various things that they have been doing and the problems that they've been causing around them, it's reached that level of, okay, we got to stop and take a look and see what's going on over there in the human world. And it's something that I was talking with Chris about, that he kind of asked what was the main issue that they're dealing with in this world. That it's not just to solve a mystery, that the investigator needs to determine culpability and pass judgment on people and decide who is worth their time to deal with. And I think that's going to get complicated the more characters who are involved in the disturbance. Beatrix is going to have to pick out, okay, who is actually kind of holding the reins on all of this? Who is just either, being forced or manipulated into participating, or who is just kind of a lousy person who their actions are made worse by someone pushing them into doing certain things and causing these certain problems. So that's kind of the focus of the last little bit of revisions that I'm working on, and then moving forward with the story, which for tomorrow I'm going to try to do a little bit of both to get through some of the other revisions that I need to do, and then add some new content on the end of that as things are coming together a little bit more in my head. that is the plan for tomorrow. I will check back in later and let y'all know how it went. I am back for Wednesday. I did actually get a little bit of writing done. It was a bit of a challenge to squeeze that in. I'm trying to get ready for a workshop I'm teaching this weekend, and it's taking up a lot more time than I expected to at this point. But I did kind of need a break from that, and so set aside about an hour to work on the karmic story. So I kind of finished up the revisions that I needed to make in these early chapters. I went back and changed the conversation with the dad, where she comes home late and he verbally and then physically goes after her and kind of just like washes his hands of her in the first version. So I changed the conversation there to reflect that they were instituting some stricter rules, that they had tried that in the past, but putting that into place. And he kind of mentions, like, Beatrix makes the claim, like, oh, Sage can improve, like, she'll get better, she'll try harder. And he's like, well, you were, but you've been backsliding, so I don't trust you. So Groundser takes away stuff, restricts a lot of privileges and such to make it more realistic, because it just wasn't before. Like, they were being too lenient for being such intense people. They weren't being true to their belief system and their personal viewpoints and issues. So that needed to change. It will push me to, in future chapters, and some of the stuff I already fixed, but to be more creative about how Beatrix is going to continue her investigation when she's being locked down as a teenager, basically. So I fixed that. And then another thing that I changed about that conversation was that I had mentioned that part of the reason her parents were angry with her was because of having sex with her boyfriend, Kendall. Initially, I wanted that to be part of the conversation because it was just what I had kind of envisioned, even though Sage's sexuality is going to come up and play a part in this. But kind of she was engaging with Kendall to maintain that relationship, to appear outwardly just a normal, typical teenage kid in a relationship. And I went back and decided that I didn't want to include that, and I didn't want... It wasn't really matching up with some of the reactions that Beatrix was feeling from Sage when Kendall would be kind of all over her or a little too gropey and obnoxious. So I changed that to it being a little bit more vague and not mentioning Kendall's name. And I'm going to come back to that in a later chapter the next time she talks to Pastor Trine, and she's going to start putting some pieces together. I kept the main structure of that section with the dad and then the mom coming in at the end and him kind of going after the mom as well. I kept most of that, but just changing some of those details to line up better with what I have planned in the future. So hopefully I'll get to those chapters this week as well. I also decided to not use the term purgatory. I think because it has too much of a religious connotation to it, and I don't think that that is a word that these entities from the other dimension, that isn't a word that they would use. I'm trying to build the vocabulary for their world a little bit more on literal word usage. They're not going to be as descriptive and kind of flowery with their language, and they don't have any sort of real religious aspect to their culture. They're just kind of a more practical people in the sense of, like, they have a job to perform and that's what they focus on. They don't necessarily have these outside communities and structures and an interest in all of that. So I decided I'm going to go with the term liminality, which basically means a space between two other spaces, or kind of being in the middle of two different things. So it's kind of just more a literal description of that space that someone might get stuck in. So I'll go back and make those changes to earlier chapters at some point, but I'm not going to worry about it right this minute. So the other thing that I did add another chapter with Cal right after the confrontation with the dad, and then at the end with the mom as well, because I was going back kind of through the timeline, and he was supposed to be checking in daily, and we haven't heard from Cal again. So this would be the point where he would be checking in with her to see how things are going. And he gets confrontational because Sage has just been attacked by her father, so she's a bit banged up. And he can sense that and kind of blames Beatrix for this. Like, why aren't you taking better care of her body? Like, how are you going to finish this investigation if you can't even keep her body safe? So kind of their interaction starts off on a not great level to begin with. And then she is irritated and kind of reacts to him and then confronts him about how terribly this case was put together. And she wants some answers on that. So their conversation kind of gave me a chance to not only build up the rivalry between them, but to give the reader a little bit more information about how this investigative process works. As I was going back and making revisions in the earlier chapters, I added some little phrases here and there and some mentions by Beatrix of her like wanting to avoid getting stuck somewhere and that there are like consequences of not finishing an investigation on time. And in this chapter, the reader gets a little bit more specific information and a little bit more background on Cal and Beatrix's relationship as well, and why there are so many problems and so much tension between the two of them. So this, I think, was a needed chapter. It was something that I just had kind of honestly forgot about Cal. But really, he needs to be checking in. He needs to be pushing and trying to basically pretend to be a good manager while also causing complications and trying to make Beatrix doubt herself and put added pressure on her. So maybe she'll screw up, maybe she'll get stuck, and maybe he won't have to deal with her for a while. So this hopefully helps develop both of those characters a little bit more and gives a better overall sense of what's going on in this investigative process, why it's important, and the structure. Because I give a little bit more information on the observers who go down in the beginning and can interact with the human dimension, but they can observe everything and then they come and report back. And Beatrix is starting to pick up on the fact that if the observer was sent down here to observe Beatrix, why is there so much that's missing? And like easy things that an observer should have been able to find out, and she doesn't have that information. So she's starting to get some hints that not only is this just kind of like a crazy, fast-paced, difficult case, but she's starting to suspect that there is something really off about the case and that it has something to do with Cal, but she hasn't pieced together yet what exactly that is. She's just kind of keeping these thoughts and these suspicions in the back of her mind. Because even though she's thinking about it, she still doesn't really have time to focus in on it and react to it because she still has that time pressure of she's got to finish the investigation and make her judgment before her time limit runs out. So it's there, but she's not paying a ton of attention to it. She just figures Cal is doing something irritating to try to screw her over, which he tends to do a lot. So not surprising, but it does feel different to her than usual. And she's going to kind of keep an eye out for other things that don't sit right with this case. So between the revisions and adding that new chapter with Cal, I added about 1,400 words on that. So it was nice to kind of finish off the revisions, and now I can look ahead and actually start working on some new content again, which will be really nice. So I will be back to talk about the rest of that later. Okay, so my writing plans for last week didn't go as planned. I spent the last couple days of the work week, Thursday and Friday, like all day nonstop trying to finish all the prep for my class and get stuff printed and binders and blah, 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 blah. And then I spent all of Saturday and Sunday teaching in the workshop and then going to writer's group. I was so exhausted by Sunday night that I did not have anything else left in me to even get one single word written. I just kind of had to call the end of the weekend or the end of that week completely as there's no writing going to get done. So I not only didn't have time to go back through and clean this up and get it posted as a podcast episode, I didn't have a whole lot done. So I decided I'm just going to add last week's little bit of work that I got done to this week, skip a week of posting, and then I'll combine these 2 weeks as week 7, because that's probably between the 2 weeks, I'll end up getting about a week's worth of writing done, because I have some house projects I need to get done this week as well. Checking in for Tuesday because I spent yesterday in my garage cleaning out the monstrous mess that it was of stuff that I shoved in there 3 years ago when I bought my house and hadn't really done anything with. But I needed to get all of that cleaned up and got a big chunk of it done. Still some more to do, but huge progress. So I was just dead by the end of the day. I was working on that literally all day, and was just too tired to do anything else. So me and my daughter kind of vegged and picked up food and watched TV last night because that was all the energy I had. But for today, Tuesday, I did get some writing done. I got 1,329 words written, which was really nice to be back kind of in a creative mindset after spending so much time and energy over the last couple weeks prepping everything for my workshop and getting through that and then teaching it and everything. So I started a new chapter, started working on chapter 15, and it was a little bit of a struggle for me to refocus on new content because I have spent quite a bit of time trying to go back and do all of these revisions and adding to my list of things that I was changing or after the revisions still needed to go back and change and adjust, and things that I needed to do that it was a struggle to get started writing chapter 15. It took me way longer than usual to get through those 1,300 words. It was just, I don't know. I think just my mind was so focused on different types of writing that trying to settle back into a creative headspace with new content, I kind of had to stop and reprocess everything I had just changed and the little bits of new stuff that I had added. And even though doing all of that was so I could move forward on a steadier plan, it was surprisingly hard to transition back to just new content and not fixing things. I'm kind of back in the mode of we're writing, editing, and revising will come later. So, like I said, it took me a long time, I think almost 3 hours to get through 1,300 words, and not feeling super, super great about this chapter. I think I'll really take a hard look at it when I go back at the end of this rough draft and start going through things, because I think it's a little all over the place, and it's kind of in 2 sections, but not. I kept it all in just one scene, but there's really 2 parts of it. So the first part is I needed to bring Sarah back into the story because Beatrix now, she's grounded, her car's been taken away, her phone's been taken away. She is supposed to go to and from school and her visits with Pastor Trine, and that's it. She's on lockdown otherwise. So she needs someone's help to get away from her house and to drive around to some of the places. So she enlists Sarah's help for 2 reasons. She finds her to be a helpful ally in this investigative process. She's intuitive, she picks up on things, she's good at thinking through and finding details, which Beatrix needs all the help she can get at this point. She's really starting to feel the pressure of time, and she needs some extra help. And she's still kind of on awkward ground with Riss, and she's not totally sure how much she can trust Riss, because she's starting to think now that even though Riss was gone when Arya disappeared, Riss has been involved in all of the other stuff. So she doesn't want to bring Riss in to the investigation out of fear that she'll pick up that something's wrong and that things might go badly and complicate things even more. So she makes contact with Sarah. She kind of basically dive bombs her in the cafeteria and has to kind of come up with this story of oh, my car's broken, but hey, I heard some rumors. She doesn't tell her about the text messages. She just says, I've heard some rumors, people are starting to talk a lot more. Maybe they feel they're a little bit safe. Nobody's paying that much attention anymore, so the rumors are getting going. And Sarah believes this, because really they are talking a little bit more freely, but Beatrix is making up the fact that these specific rumors are things she's heard. She needs to check out some of the locations that are mentioned in the text thread between Sage and the mysterious friend. So she recruits her and kind of has to keep making up lies. She's like, oh, I'm going to be, tutoring my neighbor. Can you pick me up at this address? Like, she's going to sneak out and then go a couple blocks down the street so her parents don't see that she's getting picked up by somebody. And she kind of plays and manipulates Sarah using her fascination and her need to solve this mystery. And Sarah buys into it. She agrees to help and doesn't really think too hard about some of the excuses because she's getting what she wants too. And we're just, as humans, a little less likely to question things if it's giving us the things that we need and want and that benefit us. And Beatrix is really good at doing that with people. She's had lots of practice. So she talks to Sarah, recruits her, and then I transition into a conversation with Riss. And I'm kind of debating if that transition works well. I may split the scene, or I may want this conversation to take place at a different time or location. I'm not sure. I wasn't super happy with the transition between the two scenes and the interaction with Riss. They're in the cafeteria, so it creates a reason for Riss to still kind of be mindful about the things she's saying, but it's also showing that Beatrix is making more of an effort to include her and to repair some of Riss's feelings of jealousy and hurt of being ignored lately, because she needs to build back that friendliness and trust in order to get Riss to talk. So Riss does talk a little bit more freely. She's being a little bit more direct about the fact that she does know Arya, or she did, and she knew that things were iffy around her, but there's still people around them. She's still not being completely just out in the open with everything for the same reasons as last time. Like, people could overhear, but also Sage would know all of these things, so she doesn't need to line it all out. So I think I'm still going to need a later scene where maybe Riss sneaks into her house and they're in her room or something like that, where nobody else is around, because I think Riss has been trained well enough by Sage and her dominating personality that she won't openly speak about anything unless they're completely private where nobody could overhear them. So I'm going to look for a place to add that in at some point. But for this conversation, basically what I wanted to accomplish was to start giving a little bit more hints that things were a little off with Arya, in the sense of she wasn't behaving quite like herself. Because I want to start dropping these hints and clues in for Beatrix that not only does this whole case feel off, but she needs to start figuring out why it's off. And so these types of hints are going to lead her to realize, maybe the reason that Arya was acting differently is because she wasn't herself. So I'm going to plant some of these comments. At some point, I'm going to have Sarah mention how different Sage seems from what she knew of her, and use Riss a little bit more. Riss is going to at some point get a little bit more of like, well, you already know about that. Like, why that, she's going to come to these points where it's like, well, you already know about that. Like, why would I need to say it or whatever? To where Beatrix will start getting these clues and realize that Sage was not the original target and that there had been a previous investigator to her, which will blow things up with Cal, but also really start to make a lot more sense to her. And then she can pressure Cal to give her the rest of the information that he had withheld from her. I don't think he's going to give that up easily, but I think eventually I will have him give it up, because he starts to feel threatened enough that there could be enough negative consequences for him that he's not willing to die on that hill, basically. So in this conversation, she just starts to get the impression that Arya was acting strangely, enough so that Riss took notice and wasn't sure what was going on. But Riss has a line at the end of the chapter that's basically like, I don't know what was causing her to act differently, but I think that's what got her killed or disappeared. She's starting to point Beatrice in that direction, but she's not at her most useful point yet. I still need a chapter with her later on. But for now, I'm at least repairing that relationship and making sure that she's a presence in the story so she can be part of the larger ending of the story, and it will be believable and make sense and not be like, oh, and then she came out of nowhere and just, gave her all the information she needed, because nobody likes that. That's a really annoying thing to do. That's kind of where I got to today. not super happy with the chapter, but it was kind of getting me at least back into that creative new content mindset, which I needed. And, I can always go back and fix stuff later. More stuff to work on later on, editing and revisions, but at least got some new content down this week. I did not manage to get any writing done on Wednesday. I just had some other stuff I needed to take care of and didn't end up fitting it in. But Thursday, I did get some writing done today, which was productive-ish. I got a decent amount of words down. My word count for this session was 1,513 words, but it's a little rambly, a little bit too much in Beatrix's head, and I think I'm going to need to trim some of that out because I didn't get through the whole chapter. I was struggling with the conversation. So this chapter is Beatrix's next meeting with Pastor Trine, and she's taking a different approach because obviously the last session didn't go very well, and she needs information, and she's willing to be a little bit out of character as Sage in order to get more information. And I think one of the things I'm struggling with on this conversation is that I'm not 100% sure on what information I need him to give as the writer and what information makes sense for him to have and to be able to give to Beatrix, the character, as the investigator. So I'm kind of struggling on just the end result of this conversation. I didn't want it to be confrontational again, because that wasn't going to work. That was going to just cause him to clam up and boot her out again. So what I started doing was having Beatrix be just more straightforward. And she's a little bit more solid and aggressive at the start of the conversation, where she puts Trine kind of off balance with this tactic, but also on another level kind of helps him relax into it because he quickly gets the message, this is not going to be me fighting with a teenage girl kind of a session of my parents, blah, 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 where she kind of took that tactic last time of I'm going to behave like a teenage girl and be kind of sulky and snotty and pouty and all of that. It's a big shift from their last conversation, but he's also kind of okay, maybe we can actually have a real conversation and this can be a productive meeting. So he's a little wary, but also a little bit more willing to open up to her and to talk. And so what I have Beatrix focus on is she kind of makes it clear to Trine, you know what, stop with the religious stuff. I don't share your beliefs. I'm never going to. You're not going to save me. Can we just set all of that aside and focus on what will really help me? And he's open to this. And what prompts Beatrix to take this tack is as she's waiting in the lobby or the reception area for his office, there's a receptionist, which I didn't include in the first one, so I think I'll need to go back and at least mention that she was there in their first encounter. So there's a receptionist who they're waiting a few minutes, and she has a conversation with who she believes to be Sage. And this lady obviously has some sympathy for Sage, and she tells her, hey, hang in there. My daughter spent a lot of time in this office as well, and Sage would know who this woman is and who her daughter is. So she can't be completely direct in asking her, oh, really? Who's your daughter and what happened? And tell me all the details. Because Sage should know that. So she kind of takes the approach of, oh, well, did it help? Did it fix things? And the lady kind of shakes her head and she's like, well, no, not in the sense of did she come back into the flock and all of that? But she's encouraging. She's like, you know what, even if you don't believe all of this, he still has some good things to say. He can still be someone who can help guide you. And she makes a point of saying, maybe it didn't help right away, but, later as my daughter grew older, she was able to reflect back on some of the things he helped her with. And she's in a better place now, and we've repaired our relationship a lot. And Sage is kind of she's starting to get the ideas okay, well, maybe I can focus on that. Let's not spend all our time debating, Jesus and what can happen with religion and heaven and hell and all of that. Just, can you actually help me? And she turns a picture on her desk around and says, oh, her and her partner are coming this summer to visit, and we're going to meet our adopted granddaughter for the first time. And Beatrix realizes, oh, okay, like part of the main struggle with this lady's daughter is that she was gay, and that obviously doesn't mesh with their religious viewpoints. And so that caused a lot of contention and trauma and distance in the relationship. But eventually, they were able to work out their relationship and everything. And so at first, Beatrix is kind of taking this as like, just a helpful story. This lady's trying to be nice. But one of the things I want to accomplish in this conversation with Trine that I didn't get to in this writing session is she's going to start putting a few of the pieces together that, she's had these indications from Riss that Riss has a more than friendly interest in Sage. And like I said, I removed the references to it being her and Kendall having sex. And then we have some of the times where the parents are saying, they're not going to talk about that filth and making these comments, but being too vague because they can't bring themselves to talk about what they're really most angry about. And so I open up the conversation she has with Pastor Trine talking about her mom. And that's kind of where I stopped, of her saying, look, let's leave religion out of it. How can you help me with my mom so I'm not constantly fighting her? And is there a way that we can make this better for my siblings? Because they still have to stay. They're not about to turn 18. They're stuck in the house with the mom who's unstable and unaware or unwilling, unable really is more of an appropriate word, to take the steps to get out of the abusive relationship that she's in. And she's also an abuser. So the mom is not in a place where she can separate all of that out and make good decisions for herself or her children. And so that's kind of the approach Beatrix takes first, because she knows, and she got mad last time, that the pastor has some level of understanding of the abusiveness of these parents. I don't think he fully knows. He knows she's unstable, but I don't think he knows that there's physical abuse. And I don't think I'll bring it up in this conversation that they have, but I think before Beatrix is to the point where she knows, like, okay, we're almost out of time, I think she's going to make it apparent to the pastor that these kids are being physically abused and kind of leave it in his hands. Like, if you really are going to live your beliefs, you need to do something about this. Like, make the call, have someone go in, help them. Because this is something that Beatrix really struggles with as an investigator, leaving behind the people that she encounters during this investigation. It really bothers her that she can be, taken out of the situation. She's not ever actually going to be, she feels the physical pain, but she is not stuck in these situations. But in this case, she's leaving 2 young children in this situation that is definitely not healthy for them. So I wanted to start the conversation with the mom to build up to that at the end. And it'll be kind of left up to the reader's interpretation on whether they think he follows through on that or not. Because obviously this is all from Beatrix's perspective. So once she leaves, we're not going to know. The case ends. She has to move on to the next thing. But the thing I'm going to work on for the next, to finish out this chapter, which is going to be too long, but I want Beatrix to be able to build enough a rapport of him during this session that her suspicions that are starting to build, that the thing that the parents are so upset about is that the relationship, even though she is in a relationship with Kendall, what they're mad about is that it is not actually boys that she's interested in, and that she's been carrying on a secret relationship with another young woman. I think that's why I struggled with being more concise and getting to the point with this chapter as I was writing today, because I'm not totally sure how she's going to realistically get that out of him. I'm still trying to work through that in my head. This may end up just, as I write tomorrow, probably be a really long, rambly chapter, because I'm going to be writing out my thoughts and writing my way to figuring out how this conversation will best take place. So I'm just going to let myself do that, and I'm going to go back and fix it later and clean it up and make it a little bit less long-winded, hopefully. and just get to the point better. So that's kind of where I stopped today. Like I said, this chapter is already 1,500 words. Honestly, I'm probably only halfway through it, which for the pacing that I've been writing at with this, that's going to be way too long of a chapter. But I'm just going to let it stand at that point and then deal with it after the fact. So hopefully I can get this chapter wrapped up tomorrow and find a way through this conversation in a way that's not too painful to go back and read later. And I'm like, oh geez, this was crap. But we'll see. Sometimes things just have to be crap, and then you can always fix it later. That's the joy of editing. So I will be back when I get some writing done. Okay, well, it took me until Sunday to finally get this chapter wrapped up. And as I expected, it's way too long. The total word count for the chapter is 3,292 words, which, like I said, for kind of the pacing of the other chapters, that is lengthy. So I will either at some point trim it or split it into 2 chapters, just kind of depending on what works out. Probably trim, because like I said, this chapter was a bit rambly. So I did finish chapter 16. I added another 1,760 words to my total word count today. And so I finished up the conversation with the pastor, and I had planned to just kind of like write my way through it and see where things were going to finish up. And I had kind of some ideas of what I was going to reveal and what I wasn't, and how I intended to conclude this chapter. And that really just kind of went out the window as I was writing, which is completely fine, because that's kind of the point of just writing through it and letting it be messy so I can find what works best. So earlier I had said that I'd planned to wait for Beatrix to reveal the physical abuse from the parents until closer to the end of the story, and then kind of leave it up in the air a bit on whether or not the pastor follows through on getting these kids help. What actually ended up happening as they were continuing the conversation about the mom and kind of the parents in general, it really just took a bit of a turn that I wasn't expecting to make, but that made sense in the moment, and I just went with it. So Pastor Trine knows more of the family's history than has been brought up in the book. Obviously that Beatrix knows, but likely that Sage didn't know either. The prep work for this by the Observer, we've discussed, was not great. She didn't get a lot of background information, but I'll probably need to go back and do some tweaks and add a little bit about that being kind of intentional on the Kinsella parents' side of things, that they don't reveal much about their past. They don't talk about it with the kids, so the kids don't really know a whole lot. So when Pastor Trine brings up the topic that, a lot of their current issues are due to how they were raised, Beatrix kind of just gives the very basic information that she knew, that they were raised in the Deep South in a very religious community, and that's all the information she had. But she, like I said, she kind of has the impression that Sage didn't know a whole lot more than that either. And again, I probably need to go back and add reactions from Sage, from her consciousness. I think that's going to have to be like a whole focus of one passive revisions, because I've done that really sporadically throughout, and I need to make that a more useful tool when I go back for revisions again. But anyway, so the pastor reveals that, it was a little bit more than just they grew up in a small southern town that was highly religious. He kind of paints this picture for Beatrix, well, Sage, he thinks, that basically her parents were raised in a very rural, very isolated, religious, practically cult, that they did not choose each other as partners, that they were basically told who they were going to marry, and that they had very specific, strict expectations for their lives, and that their role, as far as he understood it in leaving the community, was to basically go out, proselytize, join other ultra-Orthodox communities that held similar beliefs, and try to, draw in people to their specific mindset, and eventually, have their kids grow up, get married, bring people into the fold, and at some point go back. So that's kind of the understanding that the pastor has of things. And Beatrix questions this, because she's kind of like, well, why can't they go back? Like, if they're trying to indoctrinate us as their children, I mean, wouldn't that be more effective if they frequently took us back to their hometown in Mississippi, if we were immersed in that culture rather than being part of, the regular secular world, attending public school and all of that, which brings up maybe why they wouldn't have homeschooled them in the first place. So I probably need to add that to my list of things to think about as to why they wouldn't have homeschooled the kids. So yeah, I'll go back and address that at some point and figure it out. But basically, Sage questions this, though, that it would be more effective to keep the kids in line and believing if they were more involved with and immersed in the religious group and culture. So she kind of makes a bit of a logical jump between what he's told her and then her kind of understanding of how they've been reacting to her and her stepping out of line, that it's not just pride, but almost like a defensive response as well. And she makes the connection that they don't go back, they don't take the kids back to this community because they have been told, basically, they were forced to leave and they can't come back until they have redeemed themselves or proven something. So she's kind of making this jump and thinking that they did something that their religious community did not like. They were kind of booted out until they could prove themselves, bring back so many more, or show that they can raise their kids to be better than them or whatever. I still need to kind of think through that and work it out specifically. That's going to be, I think, a later conversation with the mom, I think, over the dad, because the dad, as Pastor Trine mentions at the end of their conversation, he thinks, the reason that they are having different reactions, the dad's kind of ready to give up on Sage and just wash his hands of her, where the mom is still like pretty desperate to fix her. So, and he makes the comment that he thinks the dad actually kind of likes being away from the cult because he likes being the one in control. He's kind of creating his own mini cult within his family, whereas the mom desperately wants to go back to the community. And so she has to have the kids be raised, right in her mind and her idea of things in order for her to go back. So maybe what might make sense is that maybe this has to do with the children, of why they had to leave their community. Perhaps maybe Sage was conceived before they were married, or, something along that lines of where the kids falling in line is their way back in to the community. So still thinking about that. But so they have kind of that conversation. She gets more information on their background, makes those logical connections that she's going to test in a later conversation. But also, I had been planning originally, like I said, for the abuse not to be revealed. But actually what ended up happening was I kind of leaned into that idea of Sage, or of Beatrix, kind of struggling on some of her cases with the idea of those who are left behind and what happens to them. And especially with children, she's especially sensitive to that. So she kind of gets worked up in the moment when he again kind of starts like being wishy-washy on whether anything can be done at this stage, blah, blah, blah. And she just kind of goes with what her intuition says in the moment, and she pulls off her top to show the bruises on her back and the bruises around her throat, and smears off some thick makeup that she'd been having on, showing where she still had a bit of a bruise from when her mom had really slapped her hard. And so she kind of shocks the pastor in that moment, and he confesses that he thought this was all, just kind of like emotional or psychological, which he was passing off as not as important, which she kind of comes back at him about how damaging emotional and psychological abuse are as well. And so he actually moves to make a call, but she knows that's going to kind of disrupt the investigation. So she reins him back in and basically says, like, right now it's just me, but as soon as I'm out of the picture, like, the other two are going to start bearing the brunt of their physical anger as well. And she says, she wants to try to get things to a better place, but if she can't, then he should call and help her siblings once she is gone. And he's thinking, she's graduating. She plans to just bolt, move out ASAP, second after graduation, something like that. So he's interpreting that as she's going to leave the household, but she wants her siblings to be looked after, whereas Beatrix knows at the conclusion of this investigation, Sage will be basically dead. We'll get into the reasons for why later. So like I said, that kind of surprised me because I wasn't planning to reveal that. But as I was writing that scene, it actually flowed the way I was hoping it to. And it shocked him into kind of blurting out the information that Beatrix was trying to get in the first place, and says, like, oh my gosh, basically, like, they're beating you like that just because you're gay. And it was what Beatrix had been, like, starting, like we talked about, kind of starting to get some hints of, but he is able to confirm that. And so now she can kind of move forward on that side of things. She makes some connections that the icky feelings of being with Kendall are linked to her sexual preference, and she makes the connection with the friend text messages that is most likely Arya, and that there is going to be some complications with Rhys and Rhys's interest in her. So I initially had wanted to kind of keep the connection between Sage and Arya secret a little bit longer, but it just wasn't seeming logical. I think the reader is going to make that connection, hopefully at the same time, maybe a little bit before, but that's not the main part of the mystery. So I think we'll see when I go back and look at, the overall pacing. I think that's a good time for this to be revealed because, my original concepts of the mystery have changed quite a bit, and there's a lot more involved for her to figure out. So I think revealing this now at this point is not complicating anything else or going to leave me like with slow parts or anything. So like I said, we'll see when I kind of look at the pacing overall and have some beta readers take a look at it and see, if I revealed it too soon or too late or whatever. And if this makes sense as a place for all of this to kind of come to light. But I think I was starting to feel like she wasn't making enough progress. And now this gives her, like, okay, some big questions are answered. Now we can move on to the next phases of this mystery and start digging into the wider issues that are going on as well. Like I said, the chapter ended up being really long. Took like 3 writing sessions to get through it because I was really struggling with just what to reveal and how to reveal it and what the point of the chapter was. But I think a lot of that came together in this last section of writing. So going back and cleaning it up, I think will be a little bit easier and hopefully kind of has gotten me a little bit more back into my writing pattern and I can make a bit more progress again. We'll see, because this is kind of my last week at home. School starts up next week. So if I don't make progress, you guys may see episodes every other week, depending on what I can accomplish. But I'm going to try to keep up as much writing during the week as I can so I can continue to get through this and make progress on this rough draft. And for information on any of my other books and what else I've got going on as far as writing in the publishing world, you can find me online at delsheriegladden.com. And the theme music for this podcast is by Monplaisir.